first year that I became a trainer. I was 23 years old working in a commercial gym. And at that gym was a fellow trainer. Her name was Mary. At the time, she was in her late 50s. She had a busy schedule, back to back client loads, and I learned a lot from Mary. We had a great relationship. And she was always really, really supportive of me. But I'll never forget the day that I told her I was leaving that job to start my own business. At first, she was supportive, but then she said something that stopped me. It gave me pause. She said, "It's a good thing that you're young and single, Alex, because I could never imagine providing for a family on a trainer's salary." Now, even though Mary maintained a busy schedule, the thing about Mary is that she relied on her husband's engineering salary to afford their quality of life. And so, in her mind, personal training was not an industry, it was not a career that one could follow to create a comfortable life for a family. It was a young person's game or a second income game. It wasn't a full time career. Fortunately, I didn't share that belief with Mary. And I'm glad that I didn't, or else I might not have left to start my own business. But what resulted from our differing beliefs is a very real outcomes. We're celebrating 12 years of my company, 18 Fitness, that has expanded to help individuals, men and women, over 19 different states and 6 different countries. For Mary, she stayed at that commercial gym until the day she retired shortly after the COVID pandemic in 2021. Mary and I shared 2 different beliefs. The first was that I had any chance of pulling off the headband long hair look like a European soccer player. But more importantly, it was a belief that I could make something of myself in this industry, that there was opportunity for growth, and that from that something could be built. So I left to try. And from this story, I want to share with you this really, really important point, which is that you have to be careful of the beliefs that you hold because they will decide your future more than anything else. And it's an interesting thing about beliefs, because if we're going to talk about them, we have to understand what they are, we have to define them. You can think of beliefs like a lens, just like you're wearing a pair of eyeglasses. It's a lens through which you perceive the world around you. And with this viewpoint of belief and mindset as a lens, what we're going to do today is what I call the internal eye exam. We're going to evaluate the prescription of that mindset lens that you're currently wearing. What are the ways in which it's serving you? And what are the ways in which it's hindering you? But what are negative thoughts? And what is negative thinking? Really, we can think of negative thoughts as negative interpretations of the environment around us. So if you think about going through the world, you are experiencing it via our senses: sight, sound, taste, smell, touch. All of those senses are bringing in information. But that information alone is just raw data. It doesn't tell us anything about the situation. If we touch a hot stove, the sensation that we feel is hot, followed by pain. But the story that we write is that that pain hurts and that we shouldn't do that again if we would like to avoid that pain. See, everything we experience is a result of a story, a narrative that we're writing in our head based on the sensations that we're experiencing. And so negative thinking are stories that cause some level of emotional discomfort. You don't have to take my word for it. Think about this difference in experience. Imagine the last time you've gotten feedback from a boss. Now, I want you to imagine that they critiqued your performance. I want you in one scenario to imagine it's a boss that you hated. How did you receive that feedback from someone that you disliked? In a separate scenario, same feedback, but now imagine it's coming from a boss that you respected and admired. How did you receive that form of feedback? The point I'm trying to make is that we can have an objectively this exact same scenario. You're talking to a person of authority who's giving you critical feedback on your performance. But based on how you feel about the person, hate or admire, you perceive that differently. And thus it elicits a different emotional reaction. This is a result of the stories that you're writing based on what you're experiencing. Take a look at this photo and tell me what you see. For some of us, we probably see a duck. The beak there pointing towards the left side of the screen. Others of us might see a rabbit. That beak now becomes the ears. That eye is now faced the opposite direction towards the right side of the screen, and what was formerly the back of the duck's head is now the nose and mouth of the rabbit. Objectively, the exact same illustration, but some of us perceive it differently. Further support about the power of the stories that we write in our head. Before we go any further, I want to play a game. And if you happen to have pen and paper next to you, I encourage you to follow along and try this while we go through it. And it's very easy. All you need with that pen and paper is to just draw out 9 dots exactly like you see on the screen. This game has a few simple rules. The first is our goal is to connect by drawing straight lines, all 9 dots. But here's the caveat. We can only use 4 interconnected straight lines. So the lines can't be curved, they have to be straight, and they all have to be interconnected. In other words, we're going to try to connect all 9 dots using 4 straight lines without picking your pen up off the paper. Can you do it? And while you give that a shot, I'm going to share my first attempt, which at first I thought it'd be pretty easy. No problem. So I went and I drew around the perimeter of the box to create that square. And only later did I realize I missed the dot in the center. Clearly, that wasn't going to work. Now, you may have tried this. You may have tried something different. And if you missed it, if you missed any number of the dots and you weren't successful, that's all right, because I want you to try again. So we're going to draw another 9 dots. And I want you to try a different strategy this time, a different pattern to see if you can connect all 9 dots. Now, while we're playing this game, I want to share with you that this is actually an analogy. It's a metaphor. It represents more than just a silly game. You see, these dots all represent the goals that we would like to achieve. For us, it could be bigger client load. It could be a more successful business, more profitable revenue, time with our family, being able to take a vacation stress-free. These are all of the dots that we want. These are all the goals that we have that we want to achieve. And we're tasked with trying to connect all of those dots simultaneously. So we try again. And you try something different. I did worse the second time around. I missed 2 dots. You see, those dots represent all of the goals that we have. And those lines, those rules, represent our unbreakable rules. Unbreakable rules might be laws. We don't want to break any laws in order to achieve our business goals. They might be our values. We don't want to violate any of who we are as a person in order to achieve the business outcomes that we want. The laws of physics. If we're helping a client lose weight, there's no way around thermodynamics. They have to be in a calorie deficit. So we're trying to achieve all of our goals while staying within the unbreakable rules. So we try again. And I encourage you to try a third time if you haven't yet been successful. So we try and we try and we try. We try to follow the rules that we're told. We try to achieve all of the things, and it still feels like we're falling short. And this is where it gets frustrating. Because it seems like no matter what we do, no matter how hard we try, something isn't working. We have to sacrifice something. We have to give something up. And it becomes discouraging, disheartening. Those dots represent all of the goals that we want to achieve. And those lines represent the unbreakable rules. And as impossible as it may feel to achieve everything that we want while following those rules, there's actually a different force at play here, something we haven't yet talked about. Those are the arbitrary rules, the imagined rules that you are following without realizing it. Now, those rules go by a lot of different names. They could be self-sabotage, self-limiting beliefs. Regardless of what we call them, one thing remains true. They are holding you back from achieving all of the goals that you want for yourself needlessly. You don't have to follow these rules. This time, as you attempt to connect all 9 dots, understand that you don't have to stay within the perimeter of the box. And this time, as long as I extend the line beyond the boundaries of the box, I'm able to connect all 9 dots, following the unbreakable rules of 4 straight interconnected lines. The reason I wanted to play this game with you is to highlight that we all have self-limiting beliefs, whether we realize it or not. We are all following an imagined set of rules that might be boxing us in and limiting our potential. without realizing it. And so everything that follows in this presentation that I want for you is the ability to begin recognizing where we are boxing ourselves in unnecessarily so that you can start breaking free from those imagined rules and you can start achieving more of your goals. Now, what is a limiting belief? We've talked about negative thoughts. We've talked about stories. We've highlighted the ways in which we might be self-sabotaging. A limiting belief is simple. It is a negative thought plus a perceived barrier. Now, these two parts are really, really important. The negative thought is something internal. It's an internal story about our capabilities. A perceived barrier is an external challenge that we have to overcome. So every limiting belief, this is going to help you recognize and identify where your limiting beliefs exist, are going to have a negative thought, something about you, and a perceived barrier, something external that's preventing you from achieving your goal. Here are some examples. It's impossible for me to escape the daily hustle and grind. The negative thought, it's impossible for me. I'm not good enough, or I don't have the skills to escape the daily hustle and grind. The challenges of running and operating a business, the external barrier, is preventing us from seeing success. Someone like me can't scale a company. Someone like me is the internal negative thought. Again, about self-worth, about skill set. Can't scale a company. The challenges of growing and scaling a business. External barrier. Other trainers are more successful than me. I must be doing something wrong. The perceived barrier, skill set, other trainers are doing better. I must be doing something wrong. Every self-limiting belief has a negative thought about the self and a perceived external barrier. Given that, I want you to take a moment and write down one self-limiting belief that you have about yourself, about your career, about your business, whatever comes to mind. It's going to follow that pattern. It's going to have a negative thought and some sort of perceived external barrier, which could be resources, it could be skill set, it could be competition, geographic location. Write down one self-limiting belief. And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to introduce you our way around these self-limiting beliefs. And I call it the lens framework. And this lens framework has 4 steps. The first is we have to understand how to look and recognize when we're having a self-limiting belief, so we know the villain that we're trying to defeat. The second is we have to be able to evaluate our beliefs, to begin questioning those stories that we're writing. Once we begin questioning those stories, we have to be able to neutralize any negative emotional reactions that we're having, neutralizing our negative thoughts. And once we've done those first 3 steps, then we open up the opportunity to begin shifting our perspective, to correct our lens prescription and see things differently. First, you have to look at your limiting beliefs. Now, we talked a little bit about how to recognize self-limiting beliefs, but there are some patterns, and I'm going to share a few with them here. For now, I want you to pay attention to these 4 archetypes that I've identified as common among individuals that fall into self-sabotaging behavior. The first is the doubter. The doubter has a blurry internal vision, internal self-worth, and external vision, how they perceive the world around them. When both lenses are blurry, just like an eyeglass prescription, it becomes the most challenging to be able to find the solutions to your problems. But now what happens if you have clear internal vision? You're pretty confident in your skill set and who you are, but you're unclear of how to overcome external barriers, resources, skills. Then you fall into the striver category. A striver is driven and motivated and confident, but they can't seem to get past the barriers in front of them. The opposite to a striver is a reflector. A reflector is blurry vision internally. They're not quite sure who they are. They don't have a ton of self-confidence, but they read the room well. They know how to manage their resources. They know what's required, but they don't believe in themselves to be able to do it. Reflectors tend to reflect their external world out because they don't quite know who they are. But as we get clearer vision, as we correct our mindset prescription, and we get to that coveted 2020, that's when you fall into the achiever archetype. The achiever has clear vision, both internally, who they are and what they're building, externally, the processes required to get there, and they're taking action. This is where we want to fall so that we stand the best chance of actually accomplishing the goals that we set forth. And if you are feeling the burnout in your career, in your business, chances are very good that you're falling into one of those first three categories: doubter, striver, or reflector. The good news is that we can correct our mindset lens using this lens framework. We can move closer to that 2020 mindset vision. Now, if you want to learn which archetype you're likely falling into now, and the reason for understanding which archetype you fall into is it sheds light on what the potential barriers are, whether you should be focusing on the internal barriers or the external barriers. And if you would like to learn your specific archetype, what you can do is scan this QR code. It's going to take you to our Mindset Lens quiz. I grade all of them personally, so give me a day or two to actually go through and send you your results. But what this quiz does is it identifies which archetype you are currently at. It will give you your mindset prescription score as of now so that you have a better sense of where to put your attention to make improvements and move past the challenges in front of you. This is how we begin to look at our self-limiting beliefs, by knowing which archetype we fall into and where the potential challenges exist. Once we know where our self-limiting beliefs exist, then we have to start evaluating those beliefs. And there's a really simple tool we can use to do this. It's called Socratic questioning. Now, this is a tool used in cognitive behavioral therapy to rewire our thought patterns. Now, to be clear, we are not conducting therapy on ourselves, but this is a therapeutic tool that we can use to begin questioning those stories that we're writing. And it's 5 questions that you can ask. The first: what is the evidence that the thought you have is true? This is going to start calling into question the objectivity of the story that you're writing, so that we can start to realize it really is just an interpretation, a story, not truth. The second: if you're wrong, what is a different way to look at the situation? Now we're really starting to hammer in how subjective our experience is. What are other possible stories we could have written, which takes power away from that original negative thought? The third: if you're right, what can you do about the situation? This question is important because it starts to move us from a problem-focused mindset to a solution-focused one. If we do have a real problem, what are we going to actually do to solve it? Very important. My personal favorite, question 4: what advice would you give to a friend in the exact same situation? The biggest challenge of dealing with our negative thoughts is that when we are having an emotional experience, it is impossible to think clearly. Our brains have a rational side and an emotional side, and they don't work at the same time. So when the emotional side is activated, we make less clear choices. So this question allows us to create emotional distance. When we're asking ourselves what advice we would give to a friend in the same situation, we all give great advice to our friends. Because when we're giving them advice on their problems, we're not in the emotional experience. We can see a clear path forward. This allows us to artificially create that emotional distance so that we better solve our own problems. And after you've gone through the first 4 questions, the last one is: what should you do now? This is important because it moves us from evaluation into action. What are we actually going to do about the situation? Now, these 5 questions are great as journaling prompts. So once you've recognized where your self-limiting beliefs probably exist, anytime you have one of those negative thoughts, you can filter it through these questions, and it will shift how you view the situation. So I recommend, after you're finished watching this presentation, give it a try to that self-limiting belief that you identified earlier. Once we've identified our self-limiting beliefs, and once we've evaluated those stories, now we have to neutralize any negative thoughts that we might have. The only scary movie that ever screwed me up as a kid is the movie Psycho, the old 60s Hitchcock black and white film. And I'll never forget that first murder scene when the woman's in the shower. It screwed me up for months afterwards. I could hardly sleep at night. And I'll never forget laying there in my bed, the lights are out, the room is dark, trying to tell myself that everything is okay, that there's no monsters, that there's no one else in the room with me, that it's gonna be fine. And something interesting happened. The more I told myself not to be scared, the more scared I became. The crack in the closet door suddenly became a portal to a different dimension full of demons and monsters. The pile of clothes on the chair in the corner suddenly became a figure sitting and staring at me. The wind and the branches hitting the outside of my window suddenly became creatures trying to get in. I may have only been 7 years old at the time, but my imagination ran wild and it prevented me from being able to sleep. That's the interesting thing about how negative thoughts work. When we start to tell ourselves not to have negative thoughts, it actually triggers having more of them. And I want to play a little game with you to highlight this point. In a moment, I want you to avoid, to do your very best not to think about a shark. We're going to start our game to avoid thinking about a shark in 3, 2, 1. Those few first seconds when you were avoiding thinking about a shark, some of us might have been successful. And if you were able to hold out those first few seconds before I flipped the screen, chances are good once this picture came on, it ruined it for you. You immediately thought about a shark. Some of us maybe not even made it the first few seconds. As soon as the game started, we immediately thought about a shark. The interesting thing about this photo is there's no shark. It is an underwater scene, so it's the habitat of a shark. There's coral reef and other tropical fish, reminiscent of where a shark might live and swim and eat. But there's no actual shark in this photo. And yet, it still triggered thoughts of a shark. This is how our brains work. When we are avoiding thinking about a specific thought, our brain flags that in our subconscious and is now constantly scanning our environment, trying to avoid the thing that we told it to avoid. But here's where it gets tricky. The more our brain avoids certain things, it triggers anything that resembles the thought we're trying to avoid. So even though there's no shark in this photo, the underwater scene triggered the thought of a shark. What's more interesting is for anyone that was able to hold out and not think about a shark, if you really thought about how you were successful at that, you didn't avoid thinking about a shark by telling yourself not to think about a shark. You avoided thinking about a shark by making yourself think of something else. And that's a clue for how our brains work and how we can neutralize these negative thoughts. You can't stop having negative thoughts by telling yourself not to have negative thoughts. It's like telling yourself not to think about a shark. You have to override them with different, more positive thoughts. Because when we're having self-limiting beliefs, we can't just tell ourselves to stop having those beliefs. We have to override them with something else. And that's the third step of our lens framework. So in step 1, we identified our self-limiting beliefs. Then we evaluated those beliefs using our Socratic questions. And now we know in step 3 to neutralize those negative thoughts, we can't just not have negative thoughts. We have to replace them with something different. And that leads us to our fourth and final step, which is begin shifting our perspective. This is going to help us have those different thoughts. And there's a couple of tools we can use. The first is to get curious. The second is to use a principle we're all familiar with, progressive overload, but to use it mentally. And third, the power of yet. When we say get curious, here's what I mean. When we are facing a setback, when we're facing a self-limiting belief, when we feel like we're falling behind or we're struggling, it's normal to face those challenges. But if we ask ourselves, what is the lesson that we can pull from that experience to serve us better in the future? That is what's ultimately going to allow us to pull ahead and actually be better. Because what we're doing is we're turning a setback into a purpose. When we learn the lesson that that setback taught us, now we stand the best chance of not repeating that mistake in the future. We are getting better. But if we're not asking this question and we're not getting curious, then we're likely to repeat it. So we have to get curious. We are all familiar with progressive overload. This concept that in order to continue to grow the muscle stronger, they have to be exposed to greater and greater amounts of resistance. But it's the same with our thought patterns too. If we embrace hardship, if we embrace setback, if we embrace new problems that don't have clear solutions as opportunity for growth, you see, the reality is when you face these challenges, it is pushing you to expand the way you think. And when you practice this, you are getting better. It is expanding your ability to handle the stress, to figure out the solutions, and to further your career. So I encourage you to embrace all of the hardship and setbacks you experience as a growth opportunity. Just like progressive overload on your muscles, it is progressive overload for your mental strength. And that reframe is powerful enough to keep us moving forward. Now, my personal favorite strategy, the power of yet. So, if you're familiar with improv comedy, it is a type of comedy, unlike stand up, where there's no pre rehearsed material. All of the skits, all of the jokes, everything is made right there on the spot with no prior planning. In improv comedy, there is a fundamental rule, yes and. And it basically means you are not supposed to stop the story no matter what information you're given. Because if you stop the story, it doesn't leave any of your other comedic friends room to keep it going, and the show ends. And so improv comedians are taught that no matter what information they're given, no matter what they come up against, they keep the story moving forward. And it's an interesting thing when we think about our anxiety, when we think about the negative thoughts that we have, when we face a setback. Often we think about it from the point of greatest discomfort, and then we end the story there. If I think about public speaking, and I think about embarrassing myself in front of a crowd of hundreds of people, what often happens is we stop at that moment of embarrassment, but we never ask what comes next. What happens after that moment? Do we revive the talk? Do we hit the rest of it out of the park? Do the people in the audience even remember the mistake that I made? Similarly, you're facing challenges in your career and in your business that's leading to a certain level of burnout, and that feels insurmountable right now. So you stop the story at burnout. But what happens if you keep going and you solve these challenges and you move forward in your career and you get to the level that you want to get to? Well, now this moment of hardship is not going to seem as big of a deal. If we keep advancing the story, we can beat our self-limiting beliefs. And the way that we do that is with one word, the power of yet. So any self-limiting belief you have, and the one that you identified earlier, what I want you to do right now is say that self-limiting belief out loud, but add the word yet at the end of the sentence. I'm not good enough to scale a company yet. I'm not where I want to be in my career yet. I'm not able to generate enough leads for my business yet. When we add that word yet on the end, we're keeping the story moving forward, just like our improv comedians. But I want you to acknowledge and recognize if that changes the way you feel about it. Do you feel more hopeful, more motivated, and less defeated? That's the power of the word yet. When we harness the power of the lens framework by first looking at our limiting beliefs, knowing what archetype we fall into, and whether we fall prey to internal self-limiting beliefs or external self-limiting beliefs, and how to acknowledge and change them, we can begin evaluating those beliefs using our Socratic questions. And then when the negative thoughts come up, we now know that we have to neutralize those negative thoughts by replacing them with something else. And we do that through our 3 perspective shifting tools, getting curious and recognizing the lessons in all of our setbacks. By embracing our hardships as progressive overload, as mental strength training, making us better, more resilient. And by embracing the power of the word yet, so that we keep our story moving forward. If you harness the power of this lens framework and you go through all these steps, not only are you going to be able to recognize the imaginary rules that you are following that are holding you back, but you can figure out more creative solutions to get to the next level in your career, in your business, to avoid burnout, and to achieve all of the things that you've set out to achieve. I want to thank you so much for listening to this presentation. I hope you have gotten some valuable information out of this, and I recommend taking that mindset quiz so that I can score it for you and help you get a starting point from which to launch into this lens framework. And of course, if you have any questions at all, please follow up with me. You can follow me on Instagram at underscore a team fit underscore. That's underscore ATEAMFIT underscore. Follow me on Instagram, shoot me a DM, ask me any questions you have. I'm here to not only help you address these self limiting beliefs, but also to move beyond them.